Welcome everybody and good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for this wonderful session. I'm really looking forward to these discussions. My name is Michelle Maloney. I'm the co-convener. I'm the convener and the co-founder of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, or AELA, and I'm really pleased to be organising and hosting for you more than 30 online events this month as part of Earth Laws Month. Before I give you a quick overview of what we've been up to in Earth Laws Month, I'd like to acknowledge country. I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work and play on Yagara Turrbal lands here in beautiful North Brisbane. I'd like to acknowledge the elders past, present and leaders emerging. And I'd like to acknowledge the oldest continuous culture on Earth and the rather remarkable civilizational culture that they had and continue to have, which has cared for country and cared for kin since time immemorial. As a descendant of the Irish folks who were part of the penal colony set up here in this beautiful country by a very strange British Empire, I also like to acknowledge the ongoing impacts and legacy of colonisation and the work that AELA and our sister organisations do to challenge and rethink the place of non-Indigenous peoples in this continent. Before I introduce our really wonderful speakers, someone just said I'm really quiet. Nothing's changed at my end. I apologise if I'm quiet. That's probably the first time in my life anyone has accused me of being quiet, Catherine. Please feel free to turn me up on your own system, or I can yell a little bit, but that might be annoying for the folks who can hear me. I was going to say...
Quiet. Am I on this properly?
Catherine, can you hear us? Because I'm going to have to mute you. We can hear you. She's having a bad
No,
day.
I can't hear you. You're very quiet. I'm just checking, so sorry to interrupt you.
Other people can hear me fine, Catherine. They're saying that on the chat.
Hearing the earplugs.
Have you got earplugs?
Right, I've just got it. Fine.
Okay, I'm just turning Catherine off while she has her own technological struggle. Good luck, Catherine. I was just saying, before I introduce our lovely speakers, I'd just like to share screen and tell those who don't know a little bit about Earth Laws Month. If you don't know anything about AELA, then welcome. We're the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, and our objective is to help share and increase the understanding and implementation of Earth-centred governance. We work through systems change approaches across disciplines, including law, economics, education, ethics, the arts, and have sister organisations like Future Dreaming and Regenerative Songlines Australia, so that we can work in solidarity with our Indigenous friends and colleagues. That's our beautiful website. And if you go to Earth Laws Month, you will see a beautiful array of predominantly free online events. And this is all about celebrating humanity's connection, reliance, and love of the living world. It's also a way, I think, to acknowledge the lovely networks of people who we're connected and interconnected with inside AELA. I won't go through all of our calendar, but a huge thank you to James Lee for making our calendar gorgeous. And you'll see that we've got webinars about law and governance. We have webinars from First Nations folks, economics. Last week was Economics for the Earth, co-hosted with our sister group, Nina, ethics, education, and arts and creativity. Inside the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, I'll show you this other website we have. Our Earth Arts program is a really important part of our work, even though we often only celebrate our artists that are connected to us every 2 years. For those who don't know, AELA is a very small organisation, created and run by volunteers. We've only just got a bit of funding in the last year, which has been a very novel concept for us, actually getting paid for the work we do. But you can see on the Earth Arts website this tagline, nurturing the role of creativity in transforming law and governance. We know that the arts and our creative and emotional selves are far more important than just transforming law and governance. But for the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, we're obsessed with shifting from a human-centred to an earth-centred mode of thinking and doing, and expression, creativity, provocation, enjoyment, fun, community, all of these aspects are part of what we see as the creative side of humanity. And we think it's really important. Later this month, in Earth Laws Month, we'll be launching our second, excuse me, Earthwords and Artlings anthology, a collection of poems and stories celebrating the living world. We have an Earth Arts collective, Last year or the year before, we had a particular focus on sound and acoustic ecology, and lots of other lovely things. So I just wanted to promote all of these good things, and the virtual gallery will be, I think we'll start promoting that at the end of Earth Laws Month and then onwards for several months. We're inviting all artists connected to AILA to upload a few of their works that they're comfortable to share, just to really help promote the beautiful work that folks are doing. So that's it for me by way of introduction. What I would now like to do is introduce our two speakers. As I say, the earth arts side of AILA's work is really important to us. It's very important to me personally as a strange creative type lawyer type. And I'm really pleased to have these two fabulous speakers join us today. We called it Performing for the Earth because Simon Kerr is a scientist, works in policy, deeply troubled by and working very hard to address climate change, and is also a very groovy musician. And I first met Simon many, many years ago when we connected around the first New Economy conference in 2016, and Music for a Warming World put on a beautiful concert that night in a very funky space in Glebe. So we'll hand over to Simon in a moment. And I just also want to introduce Robin Davidson from Rebus Theatre, a new friend actually, and I'm very excited to hear about his work as a director of a really awesome theatre company. So I'm going to duck off out of the space, Simon, and then I'll introduce Robin. They're going to talk for as long or as short as they wish, anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll have a good 30 or 40 minutes for Q&A. So if you've got any questions for them throughout, please do pop them in the chat, and we'll have a lovely discussion at the end of their presentations, which I'm looking forward to. So Robin, you can relax. You're off duty for a little bit. And Simon, it's all over to you. So what I'm interested in personally, I'd love to hear about your personal journey, some of the work that got you to where you are now, the kinds of performances and artistic activities you're involved in, what inspired you to do all of this, and how others might be able to be inspired too. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Michelle, and hello, everyone. Greetings from Wurundjeri country in Melbourne, where I currently live. The little spot of land in which our apartment block is built it has never been seeded, and I live with that consciousness, as I think all of us do increasingly these days. So, look, I'm very grateful. The opportunity to share one story is a privilege, and I acknowledge that today. So let me just give you a bit of background, and I'll talk a bit about the artistic stuff that I'm doing. And then I want to probably lurch off into some other things that I think are really on my mind at the moment as an artist and as a citizen. Actually, I'm not a citizen of Australia. I'm a citizen of New Zealand at this point, just so you're aware if you're wondering where that accent's coming from. But I live in Melbourne. I did a sociology degree as a mature age student back in the 90s, and was either going to go into sort of social policy or environmental stuff, and read it in natural resource management, and I did a master's degree in or a master's of applied science actually in natural resource management, and that really introduced me to the challenges of living on a planet with finite resources, thinking about how ought we live and the sort of tools that we have and the ways of what sort of ways of thinking do we have that might be helpful. I enjoyed it so much that I foolishly committed to do a PhD, and next few years struggled on with that, and then I was teaching during that time as well in environmental policy and a whole bunch of other stuff at a small university, basically a land-based university in New Zealand called Lincoln University outside of Christchurch. And I completed my PhD, and then my career path went on a sort of a random bit of a more of a sort of a management role. So ended up doing research management for the last sort of 15 years. And in that, I was working a lot with with scientists. So I was a social scientist, but I was working a lot with physical scientists doing agriculture, land management, forestry, all that sort of stuff. And it gave me a really good appreciation of the sort of the, not just the ongoing challenges, but the speed of change that was happening in the living world, and the sort of language games that were being played in all this stuff. Then just to complete the story, I was working at the University of Melbourne for a number of years, and then I've since been at La Trobe University for the last increasingly number of years now, about 6 or 7 years, and did a whole bunch of random stuff, policy writing for the university and all sorts of things. But I'm also on a large research project looking at the Murray Darling Basin, and a 4-year research program to look at the science, the hydrology, the climate issues, the social, economic, and cultural issues. A lot of First Nations. We're doing a number of projects with First Nations organizations around water management. And it's been an enormous learning process for me coming to Australia from Aotearoa about what Timothy Morton, the British philosopher, calls a hyper object. Hyperobjects are things, entities that we engage with that are beyond our ability to really comprehend. Like no one really understands the planet as a whole. Even we call it Gaia, for example, but we only ever grasp small parts of it. And looking at the Murray Darling Basin, I see an extraordinarily complicated system that is extraordinarily challenged. And very worrying in my view. I look to the future, and it's very hard for me to see a managed or planned way through into the source of future that we are now inevitably going to face. So in addition to that, I have an Honorary Research Fellowship at La Trobe, and it gives me space to do writing and various things around climate issues. Okay. Parallel to that, I have a bunch of guitars are sitting behind me. They're all sort of muted. You can't see them at the moment, but they're sitting there. And for many years, I've been one of these fellows bashing on guitars and writing songs, and to very modest levels of success. And a few years ago, I thought to myself, I really wanted to use my music to actually tell a story about particularly the climate issue, which I think was at the time was the critical issue for me. So I took some time off work and created this thing called Music for a Warming World. And the idea was, I have large-scale visuals with live music, and then we'll take people through a journey about the climate challenge. And so we started that in 2015, something like that. And since then we've played up and down at least the East Coast. We've had tour of Tasmania. We've played at universities and art galleries. We've played at faith communities of various types. We've played lots of community events, house concerts, up and down from Woodford Folk Festival, so down to Tasmania, trying to tell a story. Our intention was not to go out to the great unwashed masses, as sometimes people would say. Why aren't you going out to the unwashed masses? Well, partly I don't like the word, the unwashed masses, but our focus was really trying to bring a high degree of climate consciousness among the people that we're speaking with. So we started by, but let me just quickly show you. I might just cut in here for a second, and I'm going to show you, share my screen. Screen sharing, here we go. Okay, so I can share a screen, Michelle.
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay,
You have co-host rights.
yeah, I do. Here we go. Good. Okay, I'll do that. I'll put the share sound on too. Look, what I might do. Here we go for time.
Oh, we've got heaps of time.
Okay.
You've only been talking for 7 minutes, dear.
Oh, is it all? Well, okay,
Yes,
good.
all good.
So this is our website. So I'll just give you a quick sort of feel for what the sort of things we do. Okay, so that's pretty boring up that part, and that's the crew. It was a crew of a year or two ago. Some of those people have moved on, some are still around. We've got new members as well, and we've done a bunch of videos and so forth, and then I'll show you a bunch of photographs if you can see some of these down here. So this is just give you a sense of what we try to do. So if you can see my cursor, we have large-scale videos, sometimes use text, sometimes use videos, sometimes use still images that try to, I guess, provide a context for the music. We try to go text minimal most of the time. You can see another one down here, big screen, big videos going on in the background. And it's become a very effective medium for telling the types of stories that we wanted to tell. So, a whole bunch of stuff. So some of these are from folk music festivals, some of them from house concerts, some of them from other things. This one in the middle was a Brisbane one, actually, at one of the big food co-ops in Brisbane a number of years ago. Anyway, so that's just some of the stuff we do. This is a video, one of the latest videos we've done off our recent album. And what I might do is just play it for you. And that'll fill in a few minutes, but then I want to talk to it. And I want to tell you where we're going with the stuff. And I want to also talk about what I think is going to be really important for artists. So you should be able to hear it. So I'm just going to put it on now. And hopefully you'll see that full screen.
Summer's finally gone, I am pleased to know. The irons glow while the forest lingers still. Hold on tightly, hold on my friends, it's just begun. Hold on tight while this song is being sung. They say it's been a grand affair. They say now our glory days are coming to an end. We've roamed freely, we have dined with kings. We've had a most magnificent fling. Oh, glaciers melting before my eyes, the mountain springs about to trickle now. Some say that it's time to pay. The digger in the black capers, traveling narrow ways. Oh, also seen love restore sight to the blind. Seen people thrive for 60,000 years. I can see a pathway back to the light again. The final farewell to this magnificent flame. Oh,
Okay, well, that's just one example. We've got a number of other videos on our website, and different types of songs. Some, even sort of electronic folk, and bit of sort of rap and stuff, playing with different genres. But what I really want to focus on today is the journey that we've been on. And when we started the show, the intention was to take people through a journey. This is the narrative arc that we had figured out. So we started with the science. We called it the storm, coming storm. And we moved into the concept of loss. We moved into the concept of then into change, then into hope. And it was a really nice narrative. It worked really well. And we used to start with a song called Before the Storm. But in recent years, I have been increasingly dissatisfied with, or felt I wasn't connecting strongly enough with the reality of what was happening. We weren't keeping up with the reality of the changes that were taking place on the planet, what I call now the planetary crisis. And the planetary crisis is a way of thinking about that cascading set of climatic and ecological and environmental issues or crises that are all flowing together and creating a really, and then also feeding into the social system, into our economics, into our social stability, into our sense of hope for a future, or a capacity, really undermining our material capacity to actually have a viable future. And so the show's pivoted quite dramatically in the last couple of years from, hey, there's this thing called climate change, we should all get on board, to accepting the fact that most people now know about climate change. Most people are climate conscious to some extent. And now we're trying to shift our narrative to what I think is the story we're not talking about, the narrative that has not been discussed. That is, how do we prepare for the scale and speed of changes that are we're already committed to? That I think we are unprepared as a society for the level of change that is inevitable now, and it's speeding towards us. And I think the next discussion that we have to be having isn't so much about waking people up to climate change, and because that's going to happen whatever we do. That's going to become increasingly apparent. No one can escape the voice of Gaia, the voice of the planet. And I think all of us here are pretty sensitized to that reality, because we've seen the flooding and the heat waves and the bushfires. Whether you look at southern part of the US with their extraordinary levels of drought and massive issues with water, or you're looking at the unprecedented heat waves in the UK at the moment, let alone what we've experienced in Australia, one of the most climatically exposed continents in the world. And the world that we've built is not robust enough, or is too brittle for the types and the scale and the speed of these changes. So we've shifted our show in trying to think about how do we actually now live in the long emergency? How do we live in the long emergency? And as an artist, I find this really challenging, because it's been really profoundly challenged the way I think about the future. I grew up, as I said before, I learnt how to think environmentally, or I learned how to think with sort of, good tools for managing the environment back in the 90s and early 2000s when I was doing, my PhD work and writing and doing that, all that sort of stuff, and teaching. I was well trained as a social scientist in how to manage this stuff. But what I've come to realize is that the systems are changing much faster than we had realized. You can see this if you track the IPCC reports, and there's a lot of people are writing on this reality. The IPCC reports are fundamentally conservative, and for lots of understandable reasons, so that's not a criticism, but there's a lot of documented evidence for this, and their projections are almost always on the low side. Now we're tracking at the high side of their projections. And so I think there's a sort of a real test for us now, and I think this is true for us as artists, those of us doing work of art, is to really make a mental shift to realize that the way we have constructed our thinking, the way we naturally, the tools we go to, the frameworks that we naturally go to, are increasingly not going to work, or are not working, and are not going to help us with the types and speed and scale of change, the entangled planetary crisis with its ecological shocks, with its climatic shocks, and then with what it means to the economy. When you look at large sections of our own world will become uninsurable. And I see Robert McLean's in the audience here somewhere, Robert, old friend of mine in Shepparton. And Robert was telling me, and I've read the report as well since then, that Shepparton is on a floodplain. And by 2030, if I recall correctly, Robert, it's been estimated that up to 90% of properties will find it very difficult to get insurance because of their exposure to flood. Now, I think there is a sort of a material reality here that what I'm starting to think about as the second wave of denial. The first wave of denial is climate change is not real. The planetary crisis and all the impacts, we can sort of put it off, we can excuse it. We haven't done it here, but I think, among this audience, I'm pretty confident to say, but I think there's another layer that we are really now struggling with, is about how do we literally prepare physically and materially, as well as socially, psychologically, spiritually, financially for the future that is now here, when a good part of our world will become, or large parts of the world become insurable. Even if 10% of properties in Australia become uninsurable, the repercussions to our economy, to our stability, to our social stability are enormous. And I think the climate movement, we still have to be pressuring government, obviously. We still have to be having big marches, and we still have to be demanding rapid change. I could probably talk a lot about this, so I don't want to go too much into this other stuff because I've got a lot of thoughts about what we should do. But I think the big question is now, how do we live in the world that is already changed? You know, that the old world is gone. And so as a musician, I'm trying to figure out, how do I tell these new stories? And I confess I'm struggling with it. And the reason I'm struggling with it is that, you know, when Naomi Klein came out a few years ago with her extraordinary book, and you know, that was titled "This Changes Everything," I, like probably many of us, nodded wisely and went, "Naomi, you're onto something. I agree. All these people need to change." I'm realizing how damn hard it is to change my way of thinking, and to really peer into the future when the future is opaque and unclear. One of the challenges of the future is that it comes down to risk. So I know this is supposed to be an arts discussion, and this sounds like a freaking economics discussion, forgive me. But as a musician, I'm thinking about these things. So if the future now is characterized by risk and unpredictability, it means a lot of the certainties we've had in the past about how to do stuff, how to tell stories, what the nature of social change, all those things, I think all those things are up for grabs now. And the other problem with unpredictability and uncertainty is it is unclear how the future will evolve. So we're now walking into an opaque space as artists without the benefit, without the confidence that the tools that we've had, or the practices that we've had, or the ways we've approached things in the past will still work well for the future. So that's sort of where I'm at as an artist. So we've tried to rejig our show to tell a different type of story. And it's a story looking at really grappling. So we've written a bunch of songs about really grappling with the fact that recognizing that we live in a discontinuity with the past. There really is a shift with the way the world was, the world that we're now creating. And there is no going back. We're not going to return to the world that most of us grew up in. Certainly, if you look at escalating CO2 levels, the rate of CO2 addition to the atmosphere every week is just frightening. And so we are in for a rough ride. So that means we have to, I think, rethink about the qualities that we need. So in our music, then we've been focusing on things like, we have a section called courage and, what is it called actually? I'll just remind myself. Courage and compassion, personal qualities. I don't talk so much about hope, because I think hope can be hope can often give us a false sense that it's all going to be okay. I'm not so certain that we can say that with great clarity. The future will be determined by those with courage, who are determined to move on no matter what the future looks like. But we're going to work really hard to make a safer world. The faster we go, the safer the world we can build. And so those personal qualities of courage and really developing compassion, and a lot of our work then has to do with our connection to the living world. Obviously compassion to other humans, but then compassion for and with other beings, non-human beings, becomes vital in the sort of work that we're doing. And then we finish off, we look at opportunities. And I think it's a really good, we need stories about opportunity for our future. I describe, how are we going for time? Okay. Oh,
3 more minutes, Simon.
Yeah, good. I'll finish off in a second. I was going to plug my computer in before it suddenly
Ends you.
yeah, it ends me. I think of the future not as something that change is inevitable no matter what we do now. And it's like this dam that's been building up of pressure for change. You know, we live in an unsustainable world, and there is the forces of predatory delay, those whose interests are in delaying the sorts of changes we need, are holding back the dam of change. So when I often talk to climate activists who say, well, we've just got to get out there and it's up to us to protest, and if we don't do that, nothing's going to happen. I don't think that's right. I think we should protest, by the way, but I think we're going to see massive wave of change that's just going to overtake us when the pressure for change now is building up and is so strong that it will overwhelm those forces that are focused on temporary gain. It's going to be a battle. The future is around forms of conflict. We want it to be non-violent conflict, but it is a conflict over whose vision of the future is going to actually win. Because in the climate space, we have to win fast because the systems are changing so fast. So I think music then for us provides not only a means of telling these new stories, and we're still trying to figure out how to tell these new stories, and at the same time building a sense of solidarity around a new vision for living in the long emergency. Okay, listen, I'll stop.
Yeah.
I've talked enough.
That
There's
was
a lot more I can
excellent,
say, but I'll
No.
leave it at that, and I'll.
We do have more time actually later in our discussions, and I just want to thank you, Simon. That was both thought-provoking, and thank you very much for sharing your music with us too. It's quite a luxury to hear music whilst sitting in one's office. And look, there's a number of people making comments, and I'll read some of them out when we get to the Q&A. So thanks everyone for sharing your thoughts. Before we hand over to Robin, maybe Simon, the one thing I thought of as you were talking rightfully and passionately about this changed world and all the things we've lost and how do we deal with it. I remember hearing a talk only 2 or 3 years ago that rocked my world, and it was Kyle White, a descendant of the First Nations peoples of the US. I can't remember his tribal name, I'm sorry. But he talked about, it was kind of like this smack across the face for white fellas dealing with climate change. He said, imagine a world where everything you love is being killed. The people you love are being killed. You're being moved from your place and nothing will ever be the same. He said, if you want to talk to the experts, talk to us, because it's already happened. And I remember just thinking, oh my God, here we are all. I mean, obviously I'm terrified of climate change and more for the sake of the plants and the animals, but that insight just made me really rethink everything we're frightened of and everything we have to deal with. And when you talk about courage, I still look to the remarkable resilience of First Nations peoples who weren't just existentially threatened, they were literally murdered in their beds. So we have a lot to live up to step up to this challenge with courage. So I admire you, Simon, for raising these issues. And there's some good comments in there about supporting your thoughts that there is this second wave of denial. So, and a second wave of denial too. So, but thank you, Simon. And we'll come back for more discussions in a moment. And I will now literally put the spotlight on Robin and take the spotlight off you, my little Zoom buttons. So thank you so much, Simon, and we'll grab you again in a minute. So Robin, thank you so much for joining us today. And I know we had a little bit of trouble with your internet before. So folks, if he slows down a little, don't worry, he'll be back. Robin, we'd love to hear from you and, tell us a bit about your work and how you got there and what inspires you to tackle the issues that you work on there at the Rebus Theatre. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you, Michelle. So I'm talking to you all from the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. And I say that with an awareness that one of the legacies of colonialism is that so much history has been lost, and there is now a dispute amongst First Nations people around what's land is whose, and because this conflict between First Nations peoples is one of the legacies of colonialism, and that's kind of currently being played out in disputes in the land where I'm living now, otherwise known as Canberra. And I just want to draw to mind the wisdom that we have lost, the knowledge that we have lost that might have helped us along the way, and pay my respects to the elders of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples and the many other peoples for whom Canberra was a meeting place. I'm going to be quite honest. I've had very little time to prepare or even really think about what I'm going to say today. Simon set a very high bar in terms of honesty and emotional integrity in terms of what we're talking about. It's also kind of slightly strange for me. I've just come out of writing the largest grant application I've ever attempted to write, for 4-year funding for our company Rebus Theatre, and very aware of the strangeness of writing a 4-year plan that assumes the world is going to more or less keep going the way it is over the next 4 years, while also knowing that that's really unlikely, and that the extraordinary changes we have lived through over the last 3 years are only going to accelerate over time. So I am co-founder of a company called Rebus Theatre. I will sort of talk a little bit about Rebus and our history, and I've got a 6-minute video that we put together for our grant application that I will show and speak to some of the projects there, and then I'll kind of talk a little bit more about the work we have done specifically around climate and the work that we want to do, and a little bit more of my own kind of thinking around that. So we formed in 2013 as a company of people with and without disability working together to create interactive theatre as workplace training around issues of access and inclusion in the workplace. Since then, we have grown to a company that now employs around 25 people, including casuals and people on short-term contracts. And while a lot of the work that we do centers people with disability, we work with a number of marginalized communities, and we work with around a number of contemporary social issues that don't everything intersects with everything, but that are not specifically focused on a community or a demographic. So we run school holiday programs for LGBTQIA plus young people. We've recently completed a small project around the voices in our head that impact our environmental behavior. and we are just embarking at the moment on by far the most ambitious project we've ever done, which is a bushfire recovery project working across 5 local government areas. So I will just flick on a video, but I will probably stop it on the way through and just talk to some of the projects we've done, and particularly some of them that are most relevant to the conversation that we're having here. If you just give me one moment to do that.
Yep, all good. I think we can hear it.
Yes. People think because I'm articulate.
Might need to be louder.
People think I'm okay.
That might be as loud as I can do. Yeah, sorry, that's as loud as I can do.
It's okay. Please continue.
I will be surrounded without you, and I know when all those walls come down.
So I'll just stop occasionally and talk to some of the things. This is a creative development we did. Unfortunately, we never got full funding to take it to full performance, called Fractured, that we did in 2016. It was a collaboration between digital artist, a dance artist, a musician, and an actor. And it was them responding to videotaped interviews of people who have experienced trauma and of specialists in trauma recovery. And so it was a artistic response to that content. I will speak specifically to this one. So also just checking, you can hear my voice as well as the video?
Yes, all good.
You can, okay, great.
Thanks. Rob.
So this is something we did a couple of years later after Fractured, using a similar model, but for this project, we spoke to 5 different scientists working on climate change, and videotaped interviews with them about the feelings that their work brought up for them. And then we responded, we played those videos for an actor, a dance artist, a digital artist, and a musician composer. And they created a series of responses to the words of 5 different climate scientists.
Humans are affecting every aspect of our planet. It's something that's happening now, and it's serious now.
It's been verified and verified and verified. Sorry, am I depressing you now? Positive communication. Communicate positively. Instruction. Give them the science. Instruction. Don't scare people.
And I became known as the silent assassin.
The text behind there is put together of abusive texts received by one of the climate scientists we worked with.
We're going to get through this, all of us together. I make a point every morning of waking up and looking out at the beautiful scenery, particularly here in Hawaii, and going, all right, this is why I'm doing this.
And I won't speak to everything. I'll just speak to some of the projects which kind of are most relevant or seem most relevant today.
One level, I got validation of being a senior in the Canberra community, that people had thought it was worthwhile to invest in a project to get the ideas, to get the experiences and insights of being an older citizen.
We heard you can catch COVID from cats.
I heard that cocaine protects you from COVID.
No, that was great, and it was really enjoyable. It struck a chord.
Yeah, it certainly did. And I actually went, oh, I'd forgotten about that. That was story quite captivating. I liked that we didn't know where it was going.
It was really a great performance, and I think it was because it was the stories of real people and you could see the real emotion.
I will just talk a moment about Inner Climate. This is a project that we've just finished a couple of months ago, which is partway between workshop and performance. And I can unpack this more later if people are interested, but uses a technique called Cops in the Head, which is part of a body of work called Theatre of the Oppressed, developed by Augusta Boal, the Brazilian director. And audience members were asked to choose a moment when they felt an internal conflict about a change in their behaviour that might reduce their climate impact. And then we got various people up to play the different voices in that person's head in that moment and had a dialogue about what was holding people back from taking actions that they wanted to take.
Really interesting. Definitely being able to sort of look in and work out why we take the actions or don't take the actions towards a better future. I definitely realised that a lot of the problems of inaction are probably internalized ideas of why you can't do something instead of an actual barrier stopping you. It's all sort of inside.
I really enjoyed Revis's Inner Climate show. It was interactive. It was a way of really challenging ways you think and learning from other people, which I think we really need to do. If we put all the brains in a small group together, we're always able to get so much more than any individual can come up with.
Chemical Reaction is a commission that we had from the Australian Academy of Science, funded originally by the Falling Walls Foundation in Berlin, and then we did a kind of a second season with Questacon. The actual original name of it was What If Scientists Ruled the World? It didn't deal specifically with climate change, but climate change was sitting there in all of our discussions as we developed the show. And it's an interactive forum theatre show looking at what happens when science communication or science communicators get it wrong. And so the theme in this show is of discovery of a toxic byproduct in a production process, which goes to publication without the scientists realizing that there is a factory using that production process in a small town. and it became a way of looking at how science is communicated, and issues around how we feel about risk and what levels of risk people feel are acceptable to live with. So I actually don't want to talk for too much longer, because I'm actually really much more interested in having time for dialogue and discussion than me talking a lot. I guess I do want to talk briefly about a project which doesn't appear there because we've only actually just started this, which is a project called Project Alchemy. It's by far the most ambitious thing we've ever done. And it's a bushfire recovery program working across 5 local government areas, where stage 1, which we're sort of in the midst of at the moment, is a playback theatre tour. So where we're going to bushfire affected areas and using playback theatre, which is an interactive form of theatre where members of the audience tell stories from their own lives, and a team of actors and musicians improvise those stories back on the spot. Phase 2 of that project is where we are taking artists from each one of those 5 local government areas and bringing them together for 2-week-long residencies, where we're going to, well, as a chance for them to do some of their own processing of their own fire stories, and to do some training in trauma-informed practice, and for them to develop projects which they then want to go back and do in their own communities, and we'll then resource them to work in their own communities and create their own projects which they feel are relevant to the place that they live in. That's all just kind of information giving. In terms of just some more reflection, my own work, I guess, is very influenced by the ideas of Joanna Macy, and her emphasis on the necessity to do emotional work to face up to the reality of what we're living through, and what we will be living through. And I am also influenced by Jem Bendell, who people may know, who is the author of Positive Deep Adaptation, where his argument is that we are at a point where collapse is inevitable, catastrophe is likely, and extinction is possible. I'm not quite sure I'm at saying collapse, well, depending on exactly how we define collapse, whether collapse is inevitable, but it certainly is extremely likely. I suppose in my work, I'm very aware that we are facing a stage where collective trauma is going to become a part of everyone's reality. I've done some work in developing countries in Timor and Sri Lanka, where collective trauma is everyone is aware of the existence of collective trauma and that they have experienced it. That's less the case for us until the last couple of years, as we face bushfires, pandemic, drought, flood, etc. And I think one of the really important roles for the arts in the coming years is to enable the collective processing of trauma. And I think this is just my own thinking. It's not from any particular research, but it seems to me that it is very likely that the origin of art is the processing of collective trauma. That So, I mean, working a lot with trauma and trauma narratives and people who've experienced trauma, I kind of wonder about our evolutionary history when trauma must have been such a part of our lives, when, you know, it appears likely that there were predators that specialized in eating large primates, when, yeah, sudden death was so much a part of our experience in our evolutionary history, and that the growth of ritual and what, you know, eventually turned into what we now call religion, but also into art, was a way of processing that trauma and enabling us all not to be living with what we now call PTSD. And I think as we're moving more, as the structures which we depend on to create a safe life for ourselves are under threat, the experience of collective trauma is going to come back. And that one of the role of the arts, and I suppose one of the roles I'm very interested in, is in how can the arts help us to collectively process that trauma, especially as, you know, we'll be living in times where the idea of our Western model of one-on-one therapy is unaffordable and unobtainable for most people. How can we collectively process trauma? The one other thing I would like to speak to before going to Q&A is just to mention a little bit more about the Inner Climate Project, which, as I said, was about unpacking what are the voices in our heads which stop us from taking action around climate change. It was, well, one of the really interesting things for me in doing that project was that one of the things I hadn't expected was the sense of collective relief of everyone in the room going, oh my God, everyone spends so much time worrying about this. For me, there was the process involved 3 people sharing a story from their lives and the audience choosing one of those stories. I had some disappointment in that our audiences, in terms of where they were at the time, mostly chose very individual consumer consumer choices as the stories which they wanted to work on. We did have stories offered of, you know, I think I want to go and block a coal train, but I'm scared, which were not chosen. But I think that spoke to both the level of fear of an audience in terms of I'm stepping into a process, I've got no idea what this is, so I want to choose something that feels safer to work with, as well as that the consciousness that kind of direct action is actually potentially going to be critical to our survival is not fully sunk in to the audiences that we were drawing to come to our performances. But it is a work which I'm really interested in continuing to explore and continuing to see if there is a way that it can be done where we do look quite directly at what level of personal sacrifice are we prepared to make in order to bring about the level of change which will be necessary for survival, and also what are the blocks in our heads to us accepting the reality of the imminence of catastrophe that we are living in now. And I also should just also want to credit David Diamond from Theatre for Living in Canada, who actually developed that. So that the exercise which that is based on was developed by Augusto Boal from Brazil, but the adaptation of that work to look at environmental choices and choices around climate change was by Canadian director David Diamond. And so I just want to credit him as the person who I was working from in developing that work. I think I've said enough for now. I'd really like to move into more of a dialogue now.
Absolutely. And great timing. And thank you so much, Robin. I really enjoyed that overview of your work and snippets of the deep thoughtfulness of the theatre that you're involved in. So thank you. We've got a number of comments, not a lot of questions. What I might do, just to get our lovely speakers, Robin and Simon, into the mood for some questions, I might read out some of the comments. You may well have seen them in the chats, but just there's folks type as you're talking and comment about your work. And then I've got a couple of key questions that we might start with that actually wrap up a couple of the questions and comments that I'm seeing. So, excuse me. So I actually wrote, thank you so much for sharing this, Simon. Sad, wonderful and beautiful. That was your song. Someone said the storm is now here already. And Sonia said, wow, beautiful, towards Gaia, Pachamama and Earth Mother. Kind thoughts from Sonia. Other comments about the storm that's coming and the revolution that's required. Tamsin, I think, was reflecting your comment or what you mentioned, Simon, about how do we maintain connection to community when we live in multiple traumas caused by climate change. Glenn says cascading and overlapping traumas, while looking at the conventional notion of risk management is irrelevant. Peter Best says that risk is everywhere now, and he shared a really helpful link about a recent paper on the climate endgame. And he comments there about 4 particular areas of work in that paper. JP said that artists are stewards of narratives and can influence great change. And Judith and Jared, a very lovely comment there. Yes, artists peer into the complexity and invite spiritual and psychic energies that we need, in my view. Michelle says the idea of dealing with a second layer of denial really resonates for me. And today in conversation, my husband described the process as a continual unlearning. Sorry, I don't want to insult anyone by skipping over your comments. I just want to grab a few to stimulate the next stage of our discussions. Jen says, I wonder if as humanity faces environmental changes, we have within us the latent capacities that may come forth to support adaptation. I think we do. Humanity has survived ice ages and other scary things. I think climate change is a whole different bucket of fish, but definitely there's potential for us to support the living world as this happens. Many thank yous. And I might just move down. Oh, Catherine, thank you. Catherine has given a plug for an upcoming NINA podcast featuring Simon Kerr, which is lovely. The New Economy Network Australia is a sister organisation to AILA, and Catherine and myself helped to forge the arts projects and discussions in there. Sonia says, Robin, loving and thoughtful connection and communication towards spirit, but beyond distinction between souls. It's very uplifting. Tamsin asks, how can the arts be extended beyond the role of therapy to that of speaking for a more than human? That actually is a question, so we might come back to that one. Others are saying, I agree, speaking for more than human. Catherine writes, it's called dealing with the dark side. This is the foundation of systemic change. How do we collectively process trauma? So there's some really beautiful comments in there. Thank you, everyone who's joined us today. I might actually start with Tamsin's question. You know, how can the arts be extended beyond the role of therapy to that of speaking for the more than human? But that might go to a broader question, which I'd love both of you to comment on. In your work, how are you seeing your impacts? And I don't mean that in a measuring everything way, but how, you know, I'm sure that when you're chasing funding or you're having to support your work, you tell people what it's done and how it's helped. And I'm always interested in how the arts are explained to others for being powerful, because I believe and I know what it can do for me personally. But in your experience, let's start with you, Simon. The impacts of your work, do you hear people comment to you afterwards? Does it help them process grief? Does it help them think about action? All of the above? What are your thoughts?
Yes.
That was a short thought. Thank you.
Actually, on our website, we've got a bunch of sort of comments that people have made that capture quite a range of.
That's great.
Of responses. So yes, I think all of that's true. The point about art, we never apply for funding, so we've always been self-funded. art itself, I'm increasingly of the view that this is probably, I'm sure Robin has probably may have a different perspective on this, but art can't be defended in the same way as the sort of neoliberal economic project expects it to be defended. It is simply a good in its own right. And I think it's really important we just assert that. Do the counterfactual, remove all art from society, all creativity. What do you got?
Nothing.
So I'll handball to Robin. He might have more sensible things to say.
No, thanks, Simon. Robin.
Look, I mean, it's the trickiest question in terms of the kind of work that we do. And, yes, we can put out survey monkeys that say, I learned something, I felt something, and, I would recommend this, and be able to go 90% of people, which we do in terms of funding bodies.
Yep.
But it doesn't capture actually the point of what we're doing or why we do it at all. There are people trying to kind of come up with research methodologies that capture the impact of art, but it's an extraordinarily difficult thing. And I mean, part of that difficulty is that I want to be careful in phrasing this, but that, I mean, generally the best art provokes multiple interpretations. And so while, I do some work which is very much about, well, I mean, some of the work we've done, the most of has been, work in workplaces around issues of access and inclusion for people with disability in the workplace, whether as employees or as customers or clients. And, yes, there is a kind of there is a thing that we want to have happen out of that. Like there is a very clear agenda that we have. At the same time, I mean, this is using a forum theatre model where the audience interact, and the whole point of that model is that this is something we are all working out, and the how of doing that is infinitely complex, and every audience goes away with something different. And yeah, I think I've just spent a long time saying it's a very complicated question and there isn't an answer.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's kind of an annoying question, but I like to pose it to people because it's often floating around in our neoliberal kind of society. Where's the value? How do you, whereas, and I like Tamsin's made a comment there, maybe we need to move more towards the arts as every day. And I think that's very much the direction Ayla comes from and I come from personally. I may have done a law degree, but I couldn't build Ayla without creativity. You can't do anything without being creative, and you can't measure that most of the time, but we can pretend for the sake of the funding bodies, we can articulate all the surveys, exactly. So, but thank you for answering that question. And I think lots of different responses to remarkable artworks is very, very important. Thank you very much. And Catherine's made a nice comment there too. Measurement's always a problem in the arts. Since the 1970s, there's been an emphasis on the creative industries and economic indicators becoming part of the neoliberal agenda. And we need to address different possibilities. And she has thankfully given a plug. Join the Nina Arts and Culture Hub, please do. And she's recommending people read something by Justin O'Connor in Reset Adelaide. Catherine, if you've got a link for that, please pop it in the chat. That would be lovely. And there's some other comments and questions, but what I'd like to now ask you both is, in terms of the work that you're doing, we heard particularly from Simon about the future, how your arts responses are starting to change, but can you talk a bit, perhaps just each of you take a few minutes and just talk about what the future holds for your artistic expressions and your thinking about the work? Simon.
Thanks, Michelle. It's a very serious question at the moment for me.
What's worth doing? It's a big question. Yeah. Yeah,
because the story we have been most comfortable with, which is what I said before, we start with the storm, the science, blah blah blah, end up with hope. is a lovely story, because everyone can go, oh, this is the problem, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to be okay, and we all leave feeling great. I'm not of the view that I mean, humans are not going to go extinct. That is extremely unlikely as a species. But between the idea that we can go back to what we once were, and in global extinction, there's a whole lot of range of possibilities. And already, even at the most fundamental range of possibilities, for many communities, and this is all about place, where the climate ecological process is about where you live, most of all. Some places are already deeply compromised and probably won't be able to be saved into the future, is the sheer reality we're facing. Other places may actually have quite positive futures. So it's a really mixed picture. How do I tell that story? This is what I'm struggling with. How do I tell a story that says we've got to start moving away from how do we stop climate change to how we build a safe, rugged future? Yes, stopping emissions is the number one thing we have to do, but there's a whole lot of other work we have to do. So the inner work of the emotional journey, and I really love what Robin talked about before about dealing with the collective trauma. I think that's super important and wise to build up the collective capacity, the community capacity to process collective trauma, because we will experience it. So I was really taken by that, Robin, and I saw the work that others are doing as well. But how do we talk about building personal security, financial security, really good advice for our kids who are going into careers that may or may not exist in the future? What about a superannuation once the carbon bubble and other bubbles crash? How are we going to? There's a whole lot of both psychological, emotional, spiritual, and material realities that we have to think through. So I'm trying to project, think about the future, and think that how do I depict that in an artistic sense as songs? And I have to say, it's not easy. I'm waiting for a new wave of inspiration. So I'm in that process of, I'm in the dark moment at actually trying to gaze into a opaque future and think, what is the story that is most desperately needs to be told now? The old story, we know it. We've got to tell a new story now. It's probably not helpful, but anyway, that's
no. And these are the journeys we all go through. Absolutely. Thank you, Simon. Robin, in terms of your future work and the things you're grappling with, what's on your horizon? Wonky though climate change has made all of our horizons. What's on your horizon?
Look, I suppose I want to start by answering that question by just being aware of the same split that I have, that I think anyone who has looked deeply at this stuff has, of there is this logical track of things continuing as they have been, and the next project and the next funding round and the next thing and how we're going to build our company and da 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 da, and the reality that that's going to be disrupted, and parts or all of that vision or concept is going to be impossible. And that we are just going to have to respond to what is possible, and that will constantly change. Having said that, I mean, I think some of the work I'm most interested in is work which is not trying to reach a mass audience and change the world in that So, I mean, there's always been the tension with, theatre and film that, theatre only ever gets a tiny audience and film gets this massive audience. But I think theatre, and particularly interactive theatre and process-based theatre, is capable of bringing about far more fundamental change in people than something which we see outside of ourselves on a screen. And I guess what I'm really most interested in exploring is workshop processes that bring together theatre methodologies with things like Joanna Macy's work that reconnects, some of the work Claire Dunton is doing in rewilding, some of Starhawk's late work around, you know, connecting to the environment, and how do we bring about those shifts in consciousness in really deep ways through that engage the body. And I mean, I think to me that's really what theatre offers, that many other art forms don't offer, and that talk-based processes don't offer, is embodied processes. And it's my belief, and I think the evidence is there, is that fundamental change and processing of trauma and of deep emotions has to happen in the body. It can't just happen from the neck up. And so I guess I have some, you know, I'm influenced by John Seed's using the Baker sisters bush regeneration method as a metaphor, where, you know, the Baker sisters were two sisters who lived in the Blue Mountains who were published a book, I think in the 1940s, on regenerating damaged bushland. And their whole theory was, go to the bits that are most still alive and look after them, and they will naturally grow.
Yep.
And I think in a similar way, there is importance and power in going, okay, who is most awake to what we are actually going through, who is most prepared to take action, and how can we equip those people to do that better?
I like that, Robin. That's really, really lovely. Thank you. And look, we might just start to wrap up. And I guess I'd like to plug the work that Mary Graham and others inside Indigenous leadership groups are working on. But Mary Graham's work on reminding particularly non-Indigenous people about the relationist ethos. And let me just spend 30 seconds, because I'm not one of those people that just bang the drum endlessly for other ways of knowing and other ways of being, because Western is so bad. But I have found the work that Mary Graham does, reminding us that the ancient governance system of Aboriginal peoples was built on the relationist ethos. And we're working on a book together to really explore what that means. And she compares it to the survivalist ethos. And if it gives anyone, perhaps even Simon, a little feeling of maybe there are some ways that we can recoup the best of humanity so that we can move forward, it's the idea that we're not alone, we have each other, and it's only by building on the relationships with country, with plants and animals, and with each other, that we have any kind of future. And whether we are working inside our heads, but I agree, I think we have to do more with our bodies and go out into the bush and look after the stuff that's still there. When young'uns ask me, how do you stay positive? I said, I'm not sure if it's positive, but I refuse to lie under my doona and give up. I want every day, I want to be able to get up and do something useful. That might just be planting more native flowers for the blue-banded bees that live in my yard. It might be making sure I've always got water out for the possums. You know, whatever I can do, as well as yarning and talking and encouraging conversation. But I really recommend, when I listen to Mary Graham's talks, I feel not hope, not optimism, a deep sense of almost a deep joy in being a human being capable of living in relationship. And whatever that looks like in your place with the people around you, the plants, and look after what's left, grow what we can. So I've put in a link there, and there's a beautiful 1-hour public lecture by Mary Graham that's freely available on that link. Just scroll down a bit and you'll see the Indigenous relationist ethos. And I have literally, I think I've always had bits of it, but I now embed it as my way of continuing, is that if we look to each other and we build what folks in the West would call social capital, I hate that word, but that net of social cohesion, and lean on each other when we need to, that's how we keep going. And I think this session has really brought up some deep, dark and important issues. And if I can just share that little snippet from the work we do in AILA and Future Dreaming, I think that might be our little contribution to this important conversation by Simon and Robin. So I'm really thankful to both of you, Simon and Robin, for sharing this work. It's not just work, you know, it's your own personal passions and interests and achievements. So thank you for stimulating some really excellent conversations. There's some lovely comments coming in from our group. Thank you so much for this. Wild love for all of this. Many good comments. But look, unless you've got any other final comments or even upcoming shows or things you'd like to mention to folks so they don't miss out on your good work, we can just start to wrap up. And I would like to thank our audience. You've been amazing. Lots of deep and interesting comments. But over to you, Simon, just to say goodbye, and anything else you wanted to plug. Oh, you're on mute, doll. Happens to the best of us.
I'm better on mute.
I think I am too.
If anyone wants to sign up to our occasional newsletter, we do publish up and coming shows, things that are important, and also some of the writing that I'm doing as well. If you want to connect into that, just go onto our website.
Is your writing on your website, Simon? Do you do blogs and things or articles?
Yeah, articles. Yeah. But the links are all there on the writing link. You'll see it up. There's obviously writing and stuff. So it's all there. At various places. It'll take you to those think pieces, really.
No, thank you, Simon. And I did share your link earlier, so I might try to find it again. It's there somewhere. But Music for a Warming World, folks will find it. Thank you again for your time, Simon. That was really wonderful. And Robin, any parting remarks, promotions?
Well, the small plug is we are doing, as part of Project Alchemy, we're doing playback theatre performances and workshops in Queanbeyan, Palerang, Eurobodalla and Bega Valley Shires over the next 2-3 weeks. If any of you are there, then please come along, or plug it to people who might be interested who are. Information is all on our website, which is just rebustheatre.com.
Excellent.
And I guess, I am also interested that if I'm quite happy for anyone to contact me directly via our website if you would like to carry on any of these conversations further. And in particular, I am one of the things about the inner climate model is that it's really cheap. It really just involves me and a space and an audience. And it is something I'm interested in exploring more. And if there are events that would work at, or if anyone wants to kind of talk about the potential future for that project, I would be very keen to have that conversation as well.
Excellent. And can I just remind Robin and Simon, if you're ever doing anything that's online that we can promote to our largely national network of folks, we can't guarantee an in-person audience, but we'd love to promote anything that you're up to. So on that note, thank you so much again to our speakers and to everyone who joined us. We're 5 minutes over time, but it's an awesome conversation and well worth it. So thank you, everybody. See you soon, hey? Don't forget to join us tonight for an awesome science discussion with Emeritus Professor Ian Lowe and Brendan Mackey about the evolution of life. It will give you happiness and hope, a little bit of sadness, but it's good. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Fabulous.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Arnold.
Thanks, Robin.
Simon wanted to plug his new album. Do you want to take a moment to do that?
Quick, tell us about your new album. Quick.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I totally hopeless of this. We've got a new album out. It's not a website. It's also on Spotify and all these other places. If you go to a website, you can download it for whatever you want to pay.
What's it called?
Only One Way to Head.
Only One Way to Head by Simon Kerr, the only musician I know who would mention that last. So well done, sir.
I know. I keep forgetting. Anyway.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Dom. No, you're not. You're wonderful. Thank you.